Okay, thank you.
Second lapel for you too. Oh yeah, that sounds good.
Does it sound better?
Yeah, I think so. And then if it sounds fine for whatever reason, I'll just try to make minor adjustments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Turn my phone off. Is this the clicker? Okay. So laser, oh good, I got a laser, good.
I'm sorry, I probably should have showed you real quick.
Oh, it's okay.
It's kind of old compared to some of the clickers I've seen nowadays, but it has the basic, just left or right, the laser you saw, the pointer things, and it can go in and out. I think it's the bottom skinny button that kind of goes in and out of presentation mode. One of the
Okay.
two. And for whatever reason, you just need to look back into the slide because like any program with this.
Okay.
I have that there as the backup.
Okay. When do you want me to start?
Angela's going to kick us off to begin with when it's about that time. So we have 3 minutes, but yeah, whenever she thinks it's appropriate.
Cool. I'll wait. Sure. Can I get the bench? Can I use the stool?
Yep.
I don't want to walk over there. It's going to set the feedback off. Thank you. I feel like
Wherever you want to put that, as long as it's not too close to that.
I feel like a stand-up comedian now.
So I'm going to stand right here because the speaker system seems to be extra sensitive tonight, and I don't want to get too close to anything and start blowing people's eardrums out with squealing. So, hello, welcome to STEAM Cafe. I'm Angela Metler. I work in the President's Office at South Dakota Mines. We put on STEAM Cafe every third Tuesday. It's a partnership with Hay Camp Brewing and South Dakota Public Broadcasting. So we appreciate their support, and we appreciate your support as well. Thank you for coming out tonight. We are broadcasting on Zoom, so for those of you who are attending on Zoom, also thank you for attending. At the end of tonight's presentation, we'll do a Q&A with our presenter. Obviously, those of you who are here in person can ask questions live. Those of you who are attending on Zoom, you can type your question into either the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will make sure that the question gets asked and answered live. So without further ado, Tonight's presenter is Marty Two Bulls Jr., and he's going to talk about his experience as the artist in residence at the Sanford Underground Research Facility in Lead.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody for coming out. I apologize. I lost my voice on Friday, and for the last 3 or 4 days, I've just been like praying that it came back in time for this. And it's mostly back, but I'm still a little raspy. So I'll do my best to enunciate and to speak up. I am Marty Two Bulls Jr. I am an artist and an educator. I am a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. I was born and raised in Rapid City. I currently live in Rapid City. And a little bit about my background. So after college, I went down to Santa Fe, New Mexico to study art at the Institute of American Indian Arts, where I earned my bachelor's in fine arts. I focused in printmaking and ceramics. I come from a big artist family. Two Bulls is one of those names that you'll see quite a bit in our community. We have a lot of artists, we have painters, people who do beadwork, poetry, music. My family is a big arts family. My first art teacher was my dad, Marty Two Bulls Sr. He's an accomplished artist and editorial cartoonist. I grew up in his studio, learning how to draw and paint, but also doing a lot of cleaning. Some of my first jobs with him were sweeping the floor and cleaning his brushes. And he was really the person that gave me the foundations of the skills that I have today. I've spent the rest of my life accumulating more skills. Like I said, I got my BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Just learned how to learn printmaking and ceramics and jewelry work there. Eventually earned my master's in fine arts from Bard College, where our kind of focus was generally in sculpture. I'm a dad. You're going to learn that quite quickly in these slides. My family's over there in the corner. Thank you. When I started having kids, I'd realized that it was going to be really important for us to live here, to come home. So that's when I moved back. In 2017, I moved back to teach at Oglala Lakota College. And I wanted to serve my community. I wanted to teach young artists in my tribal community. But I also wanted my children to grow up around their culture and around their relatives. And that was really important for me, as you'll see kind of coming up. So I want to jump into this. I'll answer if there's any other questions about my background. I'm happy to visit in the Q&A or afterwards. But I want to jump into the surf residency. So I've done different kinds of residencies over the years with different organizations in different parts of the country, from museums to universities. But this was my first kind of scientific-based artist residency. I learned about this residency on a field trip with my daughter's school and applied and was accepted as the 2024 artist in residence at the Sanford Underground Research Facility. There is a new artist in residence who will be starting in July. They just announced him. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he does some really cool work. And I think that you should keep an eye out for the work that'll be coming out of that residency. So I was accepted. I was a little apprehensive to apply because the site that surf exists on, it exists in the old Homestake gold mine site. And that site carries a lot of weight for me as a Lakota person. And I was sort of I was just trying to figure out, do I really want to go here? What am I going to do? What kind of work can I make from this? But I think essentially what drove me into applying for this and to do this was my curiosity. I was really curious about what they were doing there. The science is, way over my head. I don't have a physics background, but I really wanted to try to learn and understand the different things they were doing. So the first picture in my slide, this is me keying in for the first time, tagging into the mine shaft. I'd gone through some training and they got me suited up in the PPE gear, which I maxed out. I was for sure they weren't going to have overalls big enough for me. And before you ask, I'm 6'9", so it was a real stretch, but they got me suited up, and I found a hard hat big enough for my big head, and they give you these 3 brass tags that you use. Still rely on a lot of old legacy processes, even though it's a state-of-the-art research facility. And so I had these 3 brass tags that had my name on them. And one tag you put on the board. This is a board above ground, and so they know who all's down below. And when you get down below, there's another board that you put your tag on, so the people managing the sites can quickly look at the boards and see who's above and below ground. And the third tag they have you put in your pocket. And what the idea is that if there's like the cave-in or in a big accident and they're having to recover bodies, they're able to identify bodies through where through those tags that are in their pockets. It's a little morbid, but it is a serious place. Like it's this massive mine system. There's a lot of potential for danger. Thankfully, SURF does a really excellent job at maintaining a high level of safety. Like I always was really reassured by all the different safety protocols that they had set up and the rules they followed, and it helped, with me kind of going in there. So this is me in the elevator. It's a small elevator. There are 2 shafts that they use, the Ross and the Yates, and there's elevators that go up and down, all day. And the interesting part about this place and kind of everything you're going to see from here on out is that everything goes down those elevators. So all the heavy equipment, all the people, all the supplies, all the materials. So when I was going up and down on these elevators, I was never in an empty elevator. It was either jam-packed full of people, like literally like sardines, like you're really tight, or it was full of equipment. And so when I would go down below, I can't remember how many times I went. I went down as much as they'd let me. So I was always jumping in with different groups that already had scheduled events going on. This group was the McCall Davis Scholars. It was a young group of students from South Dakota who were high achievers they got on the scholarship and were kind of learning about the work they do at SURF. And it was a really cool group of young people. I'm an educator, and I enjoyed being around these like kind of really smart kids, and that's who I was with on this trip. When I went down below, I kind of thought I was worried about having to be hunched over all the time. I was imagining these little mines, and I was like, shoot, I'm going to be crawling around, and it's going to be tight fits. But I quickly learned that they've changed a lot of the existing sites. So this isn't the way the bottom of the shaft looked during the home stakes operation. They did a bunch of excavating to allow them to bring out larger and longer pieces of equipment. So when they bring down heavy equipment, sometimes they'll sling it underneath the elevator and they'll lower it down. And when they get to the bottom of the shaft, they kind of pull it out like this, and that allows them to get these long steel beams down below. And they widened a lot of the spaces to allow bigger, larger pieces of equipment through. So these are all kind of modern spaces relatively compared to what's going on in the rest of the mine. These are the students that we were with. They brought pizzas with them. And I was joking with one of the kids. I was like, this might be one of the most extreme pizza deliveries that you've ever done. You got to put that on your resume, man. So this is outside of the Dune project, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. So it was an interesting contrast between, at this point, we're 4,850 feet underground. That's kind of the main working area of this experiment, of the big experiments. Due to the water levels and some of the safety issues, that's kind of the working area. The mine does go deeper. Its deepest point is 8,000 feet underground. From the last time I'd heard, the water had risen to about the 6,000 foot level. And they kind of keep it at that level in case the pumps break and the water rises, so there's a gap of space between the water reaching like the experiments, and it's kind of a safety gap. But a lot of the equipment they use is still old, like legacy homestake equipment. So this was the man cart. They call them man carts. They're these battery-powered trains, and we had to load up on these trains. And they took us to in this trip we were going to the Lux Zeppelin, or to the Davis campus where the Lux Zeppelin experiment is happening, and that's the experiment that's searching for dark matter. They're trying to prove that dark matter exists. It's an interesting process. This is a video. Do you know how I get videos to play? Maybe not. Let me see. No, it's in the presentation. There we go. So this is don't turn the sound on. The sound's kind of obnoxious, but here we are cruising through the shaft, and this is an older shaft. We're kind of jammed onto this cart, riding along. These are the students that I was with. And slowly, as you get closer to the experiment site, it goes from being like this mine, kind of rough construction site, and it starts to transform into more of like a modern, kind of sci-fi feeling laboratory, sort of outside of the dark matter experiments, leading into the clean rooms. Here we are inside. This was inside the Lux Zeppelin experiment. We're looking at, this is a piece of Ray Davis's original neutrino experiment, the tank that he used when he kind of started that work. And I won't talk too much about that history, but Ray Davis is important because he was one of the first kind of scientists or researchers to consider taking an experiment underground like that. He had approached Homestake, I want to mess the dates up, but like the 60s-ish, to ask if he could run this experiment underground. And they let him, and it was sort of like this kind of cowboy science that he did, working in this active mine. And it was interesting, I met a lot of legacy folks, and one of the legacy folks was telling me how when he was a young man working in the mine, he'd stumbled across Ray Davis's experiment, and he'd actually got to meet Ray Davis, and he's really an important part of surf, the history of surf, and it does pop into the work. I'm bringing some of this history up to give greater context to my work. We're going to look at the artwork that I created from this residency, but it's all tied to these different histories, and it's kind of the layers we're going through. This is inside, this is above their xenon tank. And during this whole time, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I was just taking a lot of photos and looking at the way they organized things and the signage and the language they were using and the way they talked about themselves. And I was really fascinated with all the stuff that was there. So I would always remember, like, oh yeah, somebody had to plan that and schedule it. And there was a specific elevator ride down for this like trash can or this blue box or whatever. The logistics were really fascinating to me because it is a remote research station. It's not quite like going to the moon, but it would kind of feel like that in some ways. Like you're just far away from, your normal life. This is the Lux Zeppelin experiment. This is their large tank. It's full of xenon, which I learned is a really valuable resource right now for a lot of different reasons. And essentially what they're doing, and please forgive me if there are any physicists in the room because I'm a layperson, and like I said, I was really, struggled to understand a lot of the specifics around the research. But essentially they're trying to prove the existence of dark matter. And the dark matter, once they can isolate it and prove that it exists, it sort of unlocks a whole lot of different other theories and equations that help explain why we're here. And this is kind of on the grander scheme of things, right? Dark matter is critical to understanding sort of the way, after the Big Bang, the way mass kind of started to come together, the early gravitational fields that existed that led to, rocks and planets and stars and, us being here inside hay camp. And it was interesting because I was thinking about this, and I was like, you're doing, and this offended some of the scientists because they're not, they're not spiritual people in a lot of ways. Like what you're doing is you're creating a narrative, you're creating it's a creation story that you're telling about how or why we exist. And it's the same impulse I think a lot of us have, a lot of cultures have around the world. We want a story, we want to explain how we got here, why we got here. My people certainly, our creation story is rooted, the Lakota creation story is rooted in the Black Hills. And that parallel was fascinating to me to think about, because in our creation story, we believe that we emerged from the earth, we emerged from Wind Cave specifically, but, whoops, sorry about that. We emerged from Wind Cave specifically, so it was interesting thinking about these scientists way underground, this granite in the Black Hills, scratching out equations and looking at readouts from the xenon tank and really trying to solve these grander mysteries of the universe. And thinking about the way my people explain our existence here, something I kind of was thinking about. So I'm going underground, I'm seeing all this stuff. I'm learning about all these things. I'm meeting a lot of different kinds of people. I'm meeting physicists, I'm meeting engineers, I'm meeting miners, I'm meeting college students, meeting foreign dignitaries. Like each elevator ride down was full of a different group of people. So I was doing my best to talk to everybody and try to learn about their specialties, what they're doing. But then I have a family, and I live in Rapid City, and I'd come out and we'd go. My youngest daughter is a fancy shawl dancer. Was really passionate about powwows, and our summers are full of powwows, and you'll see some of the powwows that we've gone to. So I come out of the mine, I go back into my community. Here she is at the red shirt powwow. There's my other daughter Odette, and with her some of her cousins playing, and I'm going into this site that for my people is considered what Homestake did in the Black Hills is considered a desecration. The extraction of the minerals and the pollution of the water and the illegal seizure of the land. It's not a place that my people think very fondly of, that area, that site. So, I'm going back and forth between these two communities and thinking a lot about my experience kind of through those lenses, like through this scientific lens and then through this other Lakota lens that's grounded in this history and spirituality. So it's kind of a complicated dichotomy. And there we go, there's Maisie dancing. So I'm back in the mine. Going back in the mine, seeing everything I can. I wanted to see anything they'd let me. The access I had was really special. I got to do things that even employees of SURF don't get to do. So going to some of these experiments, these different levels of the mine. This was a smaller experiment site that I was at. It was a geothermal experiment. But these are some of the ways the mine looks from the gold mining era. You see kind of spooky. This one was especially spooky because there was a big hole here. This was the geothermal experiment that was happening. So there are two really big experiments that are happening at SURF. There's the dark matter research and there's the neutrino research. That's what you hear about a lot, and that's where the kind of the biggest spaces are and most of the equipment. But within that system, there are a lot of smaller experiments happening. This was one of the geothermal, I can't remember which university was conducting this experiment, but it was essentially an unmanned experiment. They were doing geothermal research, and they'd contracted one of the legacy miners to go and, restart the computer if it crashed, or, it was all kind of remote research. This trip was the trip that I was introduced to the dune caverns, and this made a big impact on me. It's hard to tell the scale of this photo because it's empty, but this room is 500 feet deep, so 1.5 football fields deep, around 60 feet wide and 90 feet tall. It doesn't look like it because there's nothing in here for scale, but if you look, you kind of see these, there's a couple of little workers down here, there's another little worker down there. This is the site for the deep underground neutrino experiment, which is set to be one of the largest experiments ever undertaken in the, in theoretical particle physics. They're partnered up with a lot of different organizations, but specifically Fermilab in Chicago, and they're going to shoot neutrinos from Chicago 800 miles through the Earth's crust, and then study them on this side, and they'll go into this chamber where eventually there'll be a lot of equipment and machines, and it was incredible. Like, there was this massive cavern, 4,850 feet underground, and I was lucky. I got there right at a really unique time. They just finished their excavation. The walls were secured. They'd poured the concrete. The floors were ready, and they just finished all of that. And the next phase, which is the phase they're in now, and I think Surf had just released some photos of the construction, but now they're starting to fill it up. From what I was told, in this large space, there'll be like 1 foot of tolerance between the equipment and the wall, so that whole space will be filled with equipment and computers and all kinds of stuff. So this massive site. What it reminded me of, and again, the physicists didn't really take to this, but it reminded me of like a cathedral, the way the walls were cut and the way they kind of arched above you. Especially in that moment when it was empty, it reminded me of like a cathedral of sorts. So that was what I started calling it. I started calling it the Science Cathedral. It didn't take off. Nobody used it. We can see a little more of the scale. And again, like this giant crane, they had to take apart piece by piece and sling down and like Legos and put it back together. And the logistics were just really incredible. So I got to hang out here a couple times. The first trip down, they weren't sure I was going to be able to get in there because there's so many permissions that you have to go through. But being an artist and being the artist in residence, it kind of allowed me, I had like a real unique passport through a lot of that stuff. And so when I was down there, I was really struck by the sound that, it was like this giant echo chamber, like you'd clap and you could hear it just like bounce off the walls. So I'm a musician, and I'd ask them like, hey, could I play music down here? And they all looked at me like, no one's ever thought of that. And I don't know if that's, no, I don't think you can do that. No, we have too many people we got to ask permission for. And so, all right. And I planted the seed. I'm showing a little more of the infrastructure. These are the hoist mechanisms, and I bring this up because, again, in contrast to these state-of-the-art spaces with all this money and equipment, like the system that brings those elevators up and down is essentially the same system that's been there since like the 40s. So the steel is really old. The cables they change out, but the system that they've been using is, from what I understand, essentially the same from the 40s. I know they've updated one of the hoist rooms, but not this one. You'll see this one still has like the old school. This is the control center for that lift, and it looks like a steampunk set piece, right? They would literally, you can see they have tabs. So when this spins, this moves, and we'll kind of show you how deep the elevator is. There's like marks on the cable, so you can look at the cable and kind of see, okay, like it's the kind of something that like I feel like I would have dreamed up when I was a kid, lifting stuff into tree forts or whatever. But yeah, it's an interesting contrast to that science. This element is in the piece in the work that I created. This is an example of the core samples that they steward now. Homestake, as they were chasing gold, they were taking core samples in that area and recording their findings and using it to help make the decisions about where they were going to be, digging for gold. And the core samples sort of look like this. They're in these little cardboard boxes, and sometimes this one was kind of busted up for some reason, but usually they're like just like solid cylinders of granite. But there's like thousands of these things from like years and years of Homestake doing this exploratory drilling. It's like this massive library of these core samples. This is just one room. When I first walked into this room, I was really like, wow, this is incredible. But when you go through this door, there's another even bigger room that opens up, and it kind of reminded me of like in the end of Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they hide the Ark of the Covenant, and you see that storage facility, and it's just like this massive storage facility. And so some of this rock I wanted to bring into my work. I wanted to bring in the actual rock itself. So this is sort of where that comes from. This is more of the systems I learned about. As one of some of our guides, this was Ricky. He's one of the legacy workers. He was really a great resource for me, getting to understand better the history of that site from the perspective of the people who worked there, the laborers. Ricky worked there as a miner, and when Homestake closed, he'd left. When surf reopened, he came back and worked in surf. And he had a lot of great stories. I got to hang out with Ricky for a day. We drove around. He was showing me these places he used to work. This was one of the rooms he was talking about. This is a pneumatic, the compressor room. All the tools underground during Homestake were tools that were air-powered tools, pneumatic tools. So there was a system throughout the mine of tubes and pipes, and the air compressors were up top and had to run continuously, because if one went down, the work below would stop. So this room would run like 24/7. These machines would run 24/7, and it was really an important job to keep the compressors going. It's also dangerous too, because of the pressure that could build up or be released dramatically. And he had some stories about that happening, and it was really interesting. So as an artist, I'm trying to look at everything. I still don't know what I'm going to do. That's something everybody would ask me when I tell them what I was doing. Like, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to, like, what kind of art are you going to make from this experience? And at the time, I thought of it as like my sponge phase. So I'm going around, I'm talking to people, I'm looking at things, I'm learning about these different research and these theoretical ideas, and just trying to soak it in and let it gestate before I really decided what I was going to do. This is the lake above Homestake. This is the holding dam where it's like a poisonous lake. This is where the cyanide water was stored. You can see it's shrunk a lot over the years because surf isn't mining for gold. Homestake used cyanide to separate gold from the aggregate, and a byproduct was this like kind of poison lake, dammed lake that existed there. It's shrunk quite. You can see it's shrunk quite a bit, and because surf isn't mining for gold. That was one thing I was careful about when I took on this residency. Was I didn't want to be used as a kind of a token native person to absolve Homestake or endorse surf. I came in as an artist, and I wanted to learn and collaborate and make work, and I wanted it to be genuine. I didn't want to feel like a propaganda tool, which I didn't. I really have to say, I really appreciate surf and the South Dakota Science Technology Authority. All the folks there really were great collaborators. All the work that I'm about to show you wouldn't have been possible without their generosity and help. So I'm leaving the mine, I'm going back with the family. We're in the Black Hills. We're at another lake, the Center Lake, which isn't too far from that. And they're, waterboarding and camping. We're still going to powwows. Trying to get the summer activities in between all of these like scheduled trips underground. There's Maisie at the Two-Spirit powwow. She'd won, she became royalty from at the beginning of the summer. She won the Junior Miss Wakwa Washite Wachipi, which is like the Richard Table powwow crown. So she's, being a dignitary and having a good time. And And I'm going back to homestake. This trip I'm learning about the water systems, how they filter out the cyanide from the water. And I'd heard abstractly about that growing up here, but I didn't really understand like the incredible, in some ways, luck. The way it's done, for those that don't know, they found a bacteria that will eat the cyanide and clean the cyanide out of the water. And I'd heard that much, but I always assumed that it was something that was cooked up in a lab somewhere far away. But actually, the bacteria was discovered in the Black Hills by one of their kind of local scientists. And it was kind of incredible to me that they found a solution for this problem kind of right in this space where we also, for the Lakota people, the Black Hills is the center of our spiritual life, our spiritual calendar. It's like in some ways I compare it to it's like our Mecca. It's this holy place. There's medicines that we harvest from the Black Hills. We know, or my people know, it has a certain power to it. And it was really enlightening to see these scientists also found, they also found the key they needed in the Black Hills to help fix this problem that had been created. And this system's used all around the world. I mean, it's changing. They're currently installing a different method, but it's still the same bacteria that is able to clean that water. Xenon tanks for the dark matter experiment. I can't remember how many millions of dollars they said this was worth, but it was a staggering amount for, it didn't seem like, it looks kind of like helium tanks, right? Oxygen tanks. One of the things that I did while I was down there is I tried to, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm taking photos, I'm taking videos. I was actually 3D scanning a lot of the spaces, just trying to collect resource materials. But I also wanted to engage in more traditional art practices. So one of the things that I was doing was observational drawing. So I tried to set up somewhere out of the way and, just draw what I saw, draw what was in front of me. And that was kind of helpful in sort of processing what I wanted to say and what I wanted to focus on. That's me doing some drawing. I was always fascinated by their logistics, and I just had to throw this in there. This is how they use the bathroom down there. These are their outhouses. You don't think about it, but you're that far underground, little considerations like the bathroom, or even like how you wash your hands after you use the bathroom is all kind of different. So this was the only elevator ride that I went on where it was just for me. And I planted that seed asking if I could play music down there. And somehow it had made its way through the chain of command. And they're like, okay, you can go down, but only for this amount of time. It's on this day. And usually these elevators go down at 7 in the morning. I am not a morning person, so it was a real struggle for me to make these, but here I am with my guitar. I brought an acoustic guitar down and a couple mics, and we went down into the dune. I got to play music down in the dune cavern, and it was really a privilege because, like I said, they're preparing to fill this thing up to a foot tolerance of this whole space, so never again will it exist like this. So I was able to play music, and it was incredible. I just had my acoustic guitar and I was playing, I was singing, and mostly doing gospel music, honestly, playing gospel songs. I was kind of thinking about some of the history of the site. And the sound would just build and bounce off the walls, and it just created this crazy reverberation. There was a point where I thought they turned on some piece of heavy equipment because it was just from the sound kind of running into itself. It was really incredible. Really grateful for that opportunity. That's been kind of my experience with surf. Is I would ask them, and hey, do you think I could do this? And they're like, oh no, nobody's ever done that. No, they can't. I don't think you can do that. And then a little while later, they figure it out. Lead. I'm thinking a lot about lead while I'm here. Walking around, talking to people, checking out the little museums and shops and shop owners and restaurants, and trying to get a full understanding of that site, the space. I'm also reading a lot. doing a lot of reading, learning more details about homestake and its, history. Also, still going to powwows. This is Maisie at the Oglala Lakota Nation powwow. Going to neutrino days. We're at the Surf's Science Day event, which I highly recommend to anybody with young people in their lives. It's a fun, science-filled day of, getting to do stuff and make stuff. And I'm bringing my family into this because, like I said, this relates back to the work. So I'm going to jump into some of this work. I'll talk a little bit about it. I'm happy to answer questions. So eventually what I came up with for my exhibition was a series of assemblage, kind of paper pieces. A lot of it's photography based. So there's a photo and there's a layer. This is charcoal. The photo's in the background. It's stitched together on the top. This is just paper, so I was making masks to protect the paper. Then I'd use charcoal and then pull the masks off, so it's just raw paper. Some of these figures include folks like you saw my family. This is Sitting Bull. This is Fritz Zwielwicki, who I learned was like the grandfather of the idea of dark matter. He had kind of been the first physicist to have this question about this missing variable in their equations, which he eventually called like dunkel material or dark matter. It's represented by that chi symbol. There's Black Elk. There's some Lakota languages, some of the Lakota language here. I had my physicist friends help me kind of tackle some of the more important equations that are involved in the research that they do here. There's Ulysses S. Grant, the architect of the 1872 General Mining Act, which is the act that opened up mineral extraction in our area and the rest of kind of the country. These are Odette's handprints. This guy doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. It's Custer. Some photography from Dune. This is the Dune Cavern and sort of the negative of the cutout that we saw of Maisie. Excuse me. So this is kind of that cutout. This is George Hurst. He's the kind of the mastermind behind Homestake. He's the one who consolidated all of the mining claims into one large claim that then became Homestake. It was interesting, I didn't realize this was William Randolph Hearst's father. If you've ever seen Citizen Kane, he's like the kind of Rupert Murdoch, the kind of newspaper monopolies. It was interesting to learn about where the money went and how it affected our country. So Odette, being fierce, she's always fierce. Ray Davis, he was one of the earliest researchers to consider using that space underground as a way to study particle physics. These are some of the installations. So I have like these kind of traditional frame pieces, and then I created these installations. They gave me one of their old man carts, and they had them cut the bench off. So I used the bench and sort of created this altar with the bench. There's some more of that rock, some of the core samples, and then sage, and then some of the cutouts from the actual physical pieces. I don't often do these days like traditional objects. I work more in installation or large-scale public work. So that's kind of that stuff. Just one last, okay, good, I have enough time. So the other thing that I'm still working on, so I had this exhibition, part of the agreement with SURF was to create a art exhibition that first started at the Rudall Gallery, is currently at the Apex Gallery at the School of Mines, and its next stop will be at the Washington Pavilion. And it's a traveling show. It's more of a traditional art experience, but I kind of talked about the history and me being a Lakota person, how I kind of felt being in those spaces and thinking about things that I could do as an artist, which isn't a whole lot. something that I could do to create a generative, like kind of healing experience. So while I was at SURF learning about all their different systems, the water and the filtration and the elevators, I also learned about their ventilation system. And the way it works is that there's sort of this pressure vacuum system where there's these singular points where air is drawn in, and there's another point where it's exhausted. So when there's an emergency, they use this stuff called stench, which is this chemical. It's the same chemical that they use in propane tanks. So you can smell if there's a leak. It's just this really, it's not harmful, but it's a really stinky smell. You notice it. Just a little bit will really set off your senses. And when there is an emergency, they'll put stench into the ventilation system and it'll flood the mine with that smell. So people are trained, if you smell that smell, you know there's an emergency. You seek shelter or follow whatever procedures there are. So it struck me that what I could do within that system, I thought, the thing that I thought of was using a traditional Lakota practice, which is like we call smudging. So taking sage, burning it. Sometimes people use sweetgrass or flat cedar, but specifically I wanted to use sage. Burn the sage, and if I did it at this ventilation point, I could theoretically smudge the whole mine. I knew, it's a practice that we do regularly. So not a big ceremony per se, it's more like a daily humble practice. But I knew I needed a lot of sage. So it was, again, going back to like the music thing. I planted the seed. Like, hey guys, I have this weird idea. Do you think I can do this? I'm like, oh no, there's too much red tape. They're never going to approve this. And a little while later, they're like, I think we should just do it. So I took off with it, and I contextualized it as a land art performance, like a large-scale land art performance. That's one way I would talk about it. That's the way I talked about it with surf. Within my community, we would consider this a ceremony. And there's two sides of these worlds that I live in that I try to keep track of and keep balance in. Right? There's certain things that I won't do in my art that's related to my history or my culture or spirituality. Also kind of vice versa. It's kind of a tricky realm to negotiate, but this felt good to me. This felt like a good way to interact with the space after I'd finished up my residency. So I put a call out to my community and I asked anybody who wanted to donate sage to send it to me, and I would take it there and I'd burn it, and we'd use that sage to smudge the site. So I set up pickup points all throughout Pine Ridge. People sent sage in from all over Pine Ridge. I let people mail sage to me, so I had sage come from different parts of the country. Somebody brought sage that had been up to Mount Everest. There was a Cheyenne River doctor who had summited Mount Everest and had taken sage with him and had given it to somebody, and they brought it to me. And so I had all this sage, and my family, we sat around the table and prepared it. You can't just throw the sage into just burn the sage as it came in because it would burn too quick. When you smudge, our word for that, the Lakota word for that, and the word that I used for the project is called azalea. So to do that, to get the smoke to azalea, we had to strip it, and then I made these like little balls, or I guess they're pretty big, like a softball. And I did compress it really tight, so when I lit it, I needed it to smolder. I've never done anything at this scale, so it was a lot of like learning and creative problem solving. So we prepared all the sage, and I used an old potbelly stove, and I liked the stove because I could control the dampener and the air vents. Because I couldn't have the sage burning too hot or too efficiently because it wouldn't smoke. I needed it to really smoke. So here we are. I can't remember. I think this is the Ross shaft. I remember the name of the shaft. This is one of the active shafts they use. And they pulled the elevator up. And so just on the other side of this cage, it drops straight down 4,850 feet. I'm grateful they put up the fence, but it's still like my heart. Every time I was like going and lighting the thing, and like, see my youngest daughter is on the other side of this fence, and there's two fences, but still like that was just too close. My heart still jumps a little bit when I see how close she was getting to that giant shaft. So I burned the sage, and it just sucked straight down into the mine. The ventilation worked perfectly, exactly the way that I was hoping it would. There was I couldn't even really smell smoke from like where I was standing that close. It was just all down. It took about an hour to burn all the sage that we collected, and it was really a powerful and complicated and an experience that I'm still working on using in my art to communicate, those ideas. There we are at the end. This is my mom. She came and helped too. And there's this shaft, the crazy shaft. But it was good. It was, they'd never done anything like that before. They didn't know how we were going to do it. I was really grateful. It was interesting, the amount of exposure. The idea with taking this practice, this spiritual practice, which in a way is also a scientific practice for my people. Like it's part of our sciences. We use smoke to cleanse a space. We use that sage to cleanse a space, both like spiritually, thinking about spirits in a space or ghosts in a space, but also practically. And it's been proven that smoke will clear bacteria out of a room. So it has both sort of a practical and kind of a practical use, but also more of a spiritual use. But because they're a science research facility that prioritizes safety, they have smoke detectors and O2 sensors all over that mine. And I remember when we finished, I felt really good. And one of the safety people came up to me and was really excited. And they were like, "Marty, it worked. We could see you set off all of our alarms all the way down into the 4850 and all the." It wasn't real for them until they had the data back. But it was nice confirmation. I mean, I wasn't expecting the response from the community. I was like, maybe I'll just do a little bit, and it'll be like a gesture more than an actual like filling the space with smoke. Yeah, that's it. We've got some time for questions. Anybody have any questions for me? Yeah.
Your ancestors, what do you feel that your ancestors would be thinking of you being in the center of the blackness like that?
That's a good question. What would my ancestors think about me being there? I asked myself that quite a bit. There were times before I went down where I was like, should I be doing this? Should I be going into this space? Because like I said, there was a potential for misuse of my presence, being used as a kind of tokenized as an endorsement of what they're doing and what's happened there. And I really didn't want that to be and that's not at all what I was trying to do. I don't think I ever really conclusively felt like they never told me, so I don't know. But the Azalea aspect of this residency felt like a good closure, and being able to do that in that space and bring my community into that space. Because when I burned that sage contained literally the oils from their hands, right? Think about it that way. But it also contained their thoughts and their prayers and their dreams. And, that smoke carried that down into that space. And I think my hope was to, really for it to be a healing experience. Yeah.
So when you went to work for
I own it. It's protected under U.S. copyright law, but also it's not the purpose of okay, we back up a little bit. They own two physical pieces. They bought two physical pieces from that series you saw. So they bought the images, but there was never a expectation that it was theirs free of charge. I'm allowed to take the work and take it and show it around, travel it around, kind of what I'm doing right now. And they've been supporting it. They've been a great support in getting the work out.
So did you say it's at Laureate?
It's at the Apex Gallery at the School of Mines.
Where?
The School of Mines and Technology.
Yeah, after that it goes.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's going to go to the Washington Pavilion in Sioux Falls.
So how long will it be at the Apex?
End of this week. Yeah, it's a short. Yeah, I apologize. It's a short. The timing almost lined up, but their semester's over, and I got to get it out of there. Yeah, in the back.
Marty, thanks so much. Fantastic talk. Huge fan of your work. We had a chance to talk about this time last year before the residency, and you said something to me I thought was quite profound. You said originally homestake, was extracting gold, and today's surf has transitioned to extract knowledge. And I wonder your opinion now, after the residency and after you've had time to reflect, do you still see that evolution, or have your thoughts on what surf is today, 25 years after mining, changed at all? Anything we consider?
Great question. It's Mike Ray. I've been working with Mike for the duration of this residency. Yeah, so Mike had brought up something. This is another seed that I really wanted to plant while I was there. Was I wanted them to reconsider the way they talked about the space and the site, surf specifically. So helping them find the language to talk about, the history, and really could think of themselves as stewards of more than just like this physical construction site, but this like storied, layered, complex, space that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. My thought, the thought was, homestake extracted minerals, surf extracts knowledge. And Mike's question was, how has my perspective changed? I don't know if it's necessarily changed, but I feel a little more, not a little, I feel a lot more informed about the things that are happening there, and some of the benefits of what they're doing, are going to have, monumental impacts on our sciences, on our understandings of the universe. On the little town of Lead. Lead's changing really fast. It reminded me a lot of Los Alamos, New Mexico, which I'd visit periodically. It's a small research town full of like physicists and scientists and lots of PhDs. So it's really interesting to see how Lead has changed. I think the thing that struck me the most was the diversity of minds that were there. Like I said, the physicists, the engineers, the miners, the construction workers, the security guards, the hamburger cooks. There's all these different folks there, interacting in this small space. And I don't know, it was really fun to be around. It was really interesting to learn about. But I am really impressed with surf. Again, didn't come into this trying to make an endorsement, but they've been great collaborators, and but we feel really lucky.
Has this experience inspired you to explore other culturally and scientifically significant areas of the Black Hills? Since there's so much cultural and scientific significance here, has this kind of spurred ideas on other things you can explore in the area?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I met geologists at surf, and the history of the rock here is so unique and so dynamic. You know, we have so many kind of geological phenomena that exist here. It's all that stuff helps me when I'm working on a project and thinking about, you know, expressing an idea, having those greater levels of context or understanding makes the work stronger. Like I'm working on, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm one of the artist laureates for the Oglala Sioux tribe. And one of the tasks that I've been asked to do is to revive our winter count process, which is a process that we used pre-contact with Western, you know, culture, where we used hides and we used pictographs to record a community's history. And they're just simple pictographs. There'd be one for each year, and kind of went a lot of times in a spiral motion. And they'd pick an event from that year that was really important, and then they'd, you know, draw something. There'd also be more context. There would be a storyteller who was charged with retelling all the things that happened that year. And so like in the winter, they'd pull this thing out, usually around the solstice because it's cold and no one wants to be outside, gather the kids around, and then talk about the history and say, this was the year of the whatever, this was the year of the whatever, and tell the kids, give the kids a lesson in their tribe's history. Some of those winter counts would go back hundreds of years. I met I always say this the wrong way, not an astrologist, but an astronomer who was really fascinated with those winter counts because it's this tradition that's essentially held together by talking. It's an oral tradition. And some of those tribes were able to keep histories that predated like a lot of the current configurations of our stars. Like they would chart phenomena that happened, that Western astronomers know happened, but don't look that way anymore, like certain constellations or, you know, different star, things like that. And they were able to keep that knowledge alive just within that oral tradition. He was fascinated because he's like, you know, we kind of think less in Western academia about the oral tradition. It's kind of this folksy, it's not the right way to record a history, but clearly these people had figured out a system that would allow them to preserve things that we didn't think were possible. So there's those kind of people that I met that I'm like, hey, I want to keep talking more, like, because some of these conversations were quick and move on. So I have a whole list of folks that, you know, still talk to and interested to learn more about different processes and projects. Yep.
But going forward, I want to ask a question. Are these Zooms available to pass on to others, to audience members and everything? Are they recorded? They'll be on our YouTube channel. Yeah. They'll be on the YouTube channel. And what's the YouTube channel?
It's called Go to Mines. So if you get on YouTube and search Go to Mines, there's other stuff on that YouTube channel too, but they're all labeled Steam Cafe and the month and the year and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Any other questions? Someone I can't see.
There weren't any questions online.
Okay. All right, thank you guys. Thanks for coming out.
Once again, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I'm not going to get too close to the speakers because I don't want to blow anyone's eardrums out. We do this every third Tuesday, so next month the date is June 17th, and the speaker will be Matt Bunkers, who is recently retired from the National Weather Service, and he is going to talk about the science behind storm chasing. So June 17th, 6 p.m. right here. We hope to see you.